to Luke chapter 15. Luke chapter 15. We've been kind of on this journey to follow the life of Jesus, and we've kind of gone between the different Gospels, but we'll be in Luke for a spell here. And we're in a section of parables, and Luke chapter 15 has 3 parables in particular. And so many of these parables kind of have an introduction and help us to know. And the ones that we'll look at in Luke chapter 15 are very familiar. And some of them only appear in Luke chapter 15. So there might be a quiz at some point. You might get to be on Jeopardy, and they'll say, where is the story of the prodigal son found? And what would y'all say? Luke. Yes. I doubt they would ask that on Jeopardy because that's too detailed a Bible question for them, but who knows? All right. Okay. Well, maybe you found Luke 15. It starts off by saying, now tax collectors and sinners were all gathering around to hear Jesus. What you reckon was in their heart? Sometimes having a good crowd isn't necessarily a good thing. So the tax collectors and the sinners were gathering around to hear Jesus. Now these are people in need, people who were outcasts of society. But the Pharisees and teachers of the law muttered, "This man welcomes sinners and eats with them." So they were upset with Jesus because he paid attention to the outcasts of society. They're upset with Jesus because he had fellowship with people they considered to be below them. And I'd love to say that, this happened 2,000-something years ago. That would never happen in our society today. We would never look down on someone for, but we might have a good bit in common with these Pharisees and teachers of the law. So this is the setting for this parable, and so it's kind of important to keep in mind. He is responding to their criticism that he welcomes sinners and eats with them. Now, who did Jesus come to save? All right, everybody. But in the scriptures, a lot of times, it will say that he came to save sinners. Now, the everybody part is true too, because we are all sinners. But some people don't know they're sinners, like these Pharisees and teachers of the law. They felt a degree of, I've done these good things for God and I'm okay, and so they look down on everybody else. But Jesus came to rescue us, to seek and to save that which was lost. And truth be told, we're all lost. So then Jesus told this parable. Suppose one of you has 100 sheep and loses one of them. All right, y'all have heard on other occasions the relationship between a shepherd and sheep. The shepherd knows all the sheep's names. He knows all their specific characteristics. He knows which ones wander off quick. He knows which ones are prone to this and which ones are prone to that. There might be some personal time between the shepherd and each sheep at the end of the day to, make sure they hadn't gotten into something they had, need medical attention or that kind of thing. So the shepherd has a relationship with the sheep, and even though he's got 100 sheep, he knows them, and they know him. They know his voice. They follow him. So suppose one of you has 100 sheep and loses one of them. Now, would you just say, still got 99? What if you had a whole heap of children and lost one? Would you just say, I kept most of them? No. So what does the shepherd do? Doesn't he, this is a rhetorical question, doesn't he leave the 99 in the open country and go after the lost sheep until he finds it? So the question is rhetorical because Jesus is basically saying, hey, anybody, any shepherd, any good shepherd particularly, would do that. If a sheep was lost, they would go look for it. And when he finds it, he joyfully puts it on his shoulders and goes home. Then he calls his friends and neighbors together and says, rejoice with me, I have found my lost sheep. All right, do y'all notice any signs of joy in the story so far? He finds the sheep. He joyfully puts it on his shoulders. He calls his friends and neighbors and says, rejoice with me. Let's celebrate. My sheep was lost. I found my sheep. So it's a big occasion, right? All right. So Jesus is telling this parable because the tax collectors and the sinners are gathering around him, and the Pharisees and the teachers of the law don't like it too much. But who did Jesus come for? Sinners, people like us. And so Jesus says, doesn't it make sense that you would go where sinners are? Doesn't it make sense that the shepherd would leave the fold and go and rescue the sheep that is lost? This parable is very convicting to me because there are a lot of lost sheep. And I'm thinking, we need to find them. We need to do what we can to pull them back into the fold. We need to try to find a way to encourage them. And that's a big task because there are a lot of them. It's more than one lost sheep. There's a lot of them. But I think if we're going to do what this master wants us to do, we'll be concerned about the lost sheep. So Jesus goes on to say, verse 7, I tell you that in the same way, there will be more rejoicing in heaven over how many sinners? One sinner that repents than over 99 righteous persons who do not need to repent. So all of heaven breaks out in celebration when a couple hundred people come to know Christ. When one person returns to the fold, when one person discovers the grace of God, all of heaven rejoices. It's a big deal. Well, just in case we didn't get all that, he goes on. Or suppose a woman has 10 silver coins and loses one. All right, some have suggested that this might be some form of dowry or that kind of thing. And I've heard it mentioned that this might be like a ceremonial type headband or that kind of thing, and each of the 10 coins would be displayed. All that may or may not be true, but if you got 10 coins on display and you're missing one, that kind of ruins the display, doesn't it? Or if 10 coins is all you have to live on and you lose one, that too is a big deal, isn't it? Suppose a woman has 10 silver coins and loses one. Doesn't she, rhetorical question again, doesn't she light a lamp, sweep the house, and search carefully until she finds it? Y'all ever look for something that was lost? Okay. Yep. So there are things like phones and remote controls and things that we regularly hunt for and look for. You know, my dad had dementia, and before he got where he couldn't talk and walk, he would pick things up and then put them in unusual places. And so our kind of a standing joke at our house is that we're going to find these hearing aids, and we're going to find this, and we're going to find that. I think we've all kind of given up, but, you know, who knows? They might be mixed in with something we just hadn't gone through yet. Yes. There you go. So she finds it. She looks, well, let me back up. She sweeps the house. She searches carefully until she finds it. So she doesn't give up. She keeps at it. Persistent. When she finds it, she calls her friends and neighbors together. Hey, this is beginning to sound familiar. Rejoice with me, I have found my lost coin. So not only is she happy about it, but she involves other people, just like the shepherd did, in that celebration so that they can share in her joy. In the same way, Jesus says, I tell you, there is rejoicing in the presence of the angels of God over one sinner who repents. Now, how many sinners does God want to perish? None. So each one that turns from things that are destroying them and turns to the life that God offers through his son Jesus, there is great celebration, there is great rejoicing. All right, so those are two parables. There's one more in Luke chapter 15, and it's, of course, the most famous. And it is a powerful parable that has caused many folks to come back home. And it's known by many different names. In my Bible, at the heading there, it's called the parable of the lost son. What have y'all heard this parable called before? Prodigal son, okay. Other words? All right, not to dispute the heading on my Bible or the common idea of there being a prodigal son, let me suggest some other possible titles. We could call this the parable of the lost sons, because there are two sons and they are both lost, just in different ways. So we could look at it that way. Or, anybody know what prodigal means? Well, Jerry Clower said that in the church he came up in, the very first time he heard the word extravagant was when the church was talking about buying a generator so they could have electric lights. And what do you think they did? Well, they voted it down. That was too extravagant. So they didn't have lights in the church for a while longer until the school bought a generator, and then they would borrow it on Sundays. So that's how they solved that. The word prodigal really comes across as extravagant. So sometimes we call him the extravagance, the prodigal son, because he is extravagant in his wastefulness. But others have called this parable the parable of the prodigal father, because the father is extravagant in his love, in his grace, in his mercy. Well, Jesus continued. There was a man that had two sons. All right, let me back up just a minute. There are two sets of people listening to Jesus. Who are they again? Did I hear somebody say tax collectors and sinners? And somebody else said Pharisees and teachers of the law? So he's got two separate groups that are listening to this parable. And lo and behold, there are two sons. Do you reckon each one of the sons could represent each of the two groups? Maybe so. We'll read a little bit more. There was a man who had two sons. The younger one said to his father, "Father, give me my share of the estate." So he divided his property between them. Now, this is incredibly disrespectful and just really horrific. In that culture, most people would have killed the son for making such a request. And it's worse than we think, because you couldn't just run down to the bank and divide up your savings account. Your money was in land and livestock and produce. So you might have to sell off land that's been in your family for generations to be able to divide your wealth between these two sons. It's an incredible insult, because basically he's saying, hey, you're not dead yet, but let's play like you are. Let's act like you've already died, and we're going to split up the inheritance. So just incredible disrespect to his father. And the strange thing, and there are several strange things in this story, but one of the first ones is the father goes along with it. He divides up his resources between his two sons, and he lets the younger son go. Not long after that, the younger son got together all he had, set off for it. Well, I missed a point here. Let me make this obvious too. This would not have been a private event. I think I might have told you, my first church out of seminary, I lived in a parsonage beside the church, and I guess I'd been there about a month, and in the night I had a stomach virus, and so I turned on the lights and was kind of tending to myself, and then the phone rings. I think, who's calling me at this hour? Has there been a death? No, they saw my light on, just wanted to check on me. You know, so nothing escaped notice. And that was that way probably with this community too. This father liquidating his wealth would have drawn a lot of attention and a lot of conversation. And various people would have had their opinions about, what he was doing and why. So not long after that, the younger son got together all he had and set out for a distant country. Wanted to put as much space between he and his family as he could. And there he squandered his wealth in wild living. It can go pretty fast. After he had spent everything, there was a severe famine in the whole country, and he began to be in need. So he went and hired himself out to a citizen of that country, who sent him to his fields to feed pigs. And he longed to fill his stomach with the pods that the pigs were eating, but no one gave him anything. So he's gone from having his father's wealth and wasting it to now being destitute and hungry and longing for food that you fed pigs. And for a good Jewish boy, that would be about as low as you could get. Jewish people didn't handle pigs, didn't feed pigs, didn't touch pigs, didn't eat pigs. And so to get a job taking care of pigs and then wanting their food, that's pretty bad. So he's gone from being a favored younger son to having his father's wealth to wasting everything and basically having nothing. And he doesn't have a support system, right? Nobody's going to give him anything. Nobody cares about him there. He is in a distant country. Are there people, I know there are people that live in distant countries, but are there people that spiritually live in a distant country where they've kind of cut off the help that could be theirs, and they don't have a support system? If something bad happens, they don't have anybody they can call on. I can't imagine what that would be like, but there are people that live like that, aren't there? Well, verse 17. I love the way this is phrased, and I like the older version of it too. My translation says, when he came to his senses. He woke up, smelled the coffee. He had a moment where things began to click in his mind. He began to realize things. The older version there, y'all remember what it said? He came to himself. I like that one too. He came to his senses and he said, how many of my father's hired servants have food to spare, and here I am starving to death? I will set out and go back to my father and say to him, Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I'm no longer worthy to be called your son. Make me like one of your hired servants. So he got up and went to his father. All right, so he's had a revelation. He'd be better off in his father's household. And sometimes we use this section to say he repented. He realized the error of his ways and he headed back home. And that's partially true. But let me poke a hole in it for a minute. Does he miss his father? According to this, he misses his father's house and the comforts of home. I didn't read anything about him missing his father, right? So he realizes when he comes to himself that he'd be better off at home, but there's no, I need to get back to my people. I need to see my father. I miss my dad. There's none of that here. He does know, though, that he sinned against them. He sinned against his father. He sinned against heaven. He sinned against God in the way that he has lived his life. And so he is turning back, and that's a good thing. So he got up and went to his father. But while he was still a long way off, his father saw him. Now, what's that mean? How would his father spot him when he's a long way off? Yeah. Sometimes I go out on the front porch and hope y'all are coming to church. I do. Where they at? Wonder if they're coming. He was looking for him. And so when he's a long way off, he spots him. And he was filled with compassion. Now, if somebody took your money and wasted it, how much sympathy would you have for them? Even if they're your own flesh and blood. He has compassion for his son. He ran to his son. Picture an old man having to gird up his, clothes and running. Very undignified thing to do, but this father doesn't care about that at this moment. He threw his arms around him and kissed him. The son said to him, "Father, I have sinned against heaven and against you. I am no longer worthy to be called your son." But the father said to his servants, "Quick, bring the best robe." Who do you reckon the best robe in the house belonged to? Father, right? Bring the best robe. Might even be my robe. Bring it. Bring the best robe and put it on him. Bring a ring for his finger and sandals for his feet. Bring the fatted calf and kill it. Let's have a feast and celebrate. Well, what's a ring do for you? It gives you status. And in ancient times, you sealed things, important papers and stuff with your ring, and it'd be like a checkbook or that kind of thing. So it means he's been embraced as a fully endowed member of the family again, with the resources and the privileges that come with that. How about sandals? And why isn't this boy wearing any shoes? All right, he might have worn them out. He might have sold them because, choice between shoes and food, I know which one would win for me. He ain't got no shoes. But the sandals distinguish him as a son and not a servant. So even though he says, "I'm not worthy to be your son," the father's having none of that. Bring some sandals. We're going to take care of this. Put the best robe on him. Bring sandals for his feet. Bring a ring. And then look at the father's choice of the dinner menu. How many sons does father have? 2. So if you got a small, close-knit family, you don't necessarily have to kill a big calf. I mean, you could go with a little tiny lamb, maybe. It'd be enough, or a roast you get at Food Line or something. That'd be enough. So what's the point of the fatted calf? Why such extravagance? All right, the best part of it. Did I mention to y'all that all this stuff was pretty public? If you kill a fatted calf, who's it going to feed? Everybody, right? So this party is for the son. It's also for the whole community. So what the father is saying by that is, okay, I know y'all have said some bad things about my boy, but you can't say bad things about him and eat his food at the same time. So come on, let's celebrate. Let's embrace each other. Let's love each other. He gives his son back full status, not only at home, but also in the community. That's a pretty amazing story. You see why some people call this the story of the prodigal father? He is extravagant in his love. He doesn't just pat him on the head and say, "Welcome home." He goes all out, over and above, beyond what anyone would really do. Yes. Yes. So yes, let me go there for just a moment. Who is this lost boy? I mean, we don't know his name here, but could he be us? Yeah, at different times in our life, we have rebelled. We have done all kinds of things to go to a foreign country and waste the resources that God gave us. Maybe not the same way this guy did, but we've wasted our time, we've wasted our money, we've wasted all kinds of things along the way. We've all done that. We've all rebelled. And who is the Father? Yeah, God, our God the Son, Jesus. and he is the one who embraces us. So he wants us to come back home, and he will embrace us, and he will lavish us with his love. John writes, "Oh, how great the Father has lavished his love upon us that we should be called his children." So that's a beautiful, powerful thing. So he is embraced. The Father goes on to say, "For this son of mine was dead and is alive again. He was lost and is found." So they began to celebrate. Now, I often connect the story of the man born blind to Isaac Newton's Amazing Grace. I once was lost, but now I'm found, was blind, but now I see. But you see, it's part of this story too. And it's part of your story. It's part of my story. The son has come home. There's a great celebration. When one sinner repents, who celebrates? All the angels of heaven. Well, it will be a beautiful, powerful, inspirational, feel-good story if we just stopped there. Does Jesus stop there? Nope. Meanwhile, he says, the older son was in the field. And when he came near the house, he heard music and dancing. So he called one of the servants and asked him what was going on. "Your brother has come," he replied, "and your father has killed the fatted calf because he has him back safe and sound." Sounds reasonable, doesn't it? And what the servant reports. But the older brother became angry and refused to go in. Who's he angry at? Yeah. Who did we say the Father was again? God or Jesus? He's angry and refuses to go in. All right, so a lot of us would say, okay, you made your choice. You don't want to come to this party. You're just going to miss out on some good food. That's not what this father does. This father went out and pleaded with him. Who's the host of the party? The father. Who leaves his guests so he can go out and talk to this angry son? The father. See, the father hadn't given up on him either. But he answered his father, "Look, all these years I've been slaving for you and never disobeyed your orders. Yet you never gave me even a young goat so I could celebrate with my friends. And when this son of yours, who has squandered your property with prostitutes, comes home, you kill the fatted calf for him." So we got a little more of the story there. Earlier, Luke didn't tell us what he wasted his money on, but now we have a little more idea, or at least that's the report from his older brother, who's pretty angry about these things. May or may not be true. It's what the older brother thinks, though. Does he call him his brother? Doesn't, does he? That's telling. This son of yours. So this father has been blamed for a lot of stuff. It's not my brother. He's a son of yours. Do you notice that he spends a lot of time showing respect and honor to his father? Well, you might not have noticed that because it's not there. That was a trick question. No, he is very disrespectful. He does not address his father in a respectful way. He's angry. He blames his father. I would say that he is lost too. The other son was lost because he went to a distant country. This son stayed home and is lost. And he says, "I did everything you asked me to do, and I have slaved for you. Therefore, I'm entitled." He didn't say that last part, but can you read it into it? Are there people in the world today that feel entitled? Yes. Okay. Cheryl said, "How much time do we have?" She's going to tell me about some entitled people. Yeah, it's a bad way to be. to feel entitled. You feel like you have earned God's favor. Boy, is that a dangerous slope. Can we earn God's favor? No. We can't work enough. We can't be good enough. Offering envelopes and Sunday school things used to have these little boxes that you check. I brought a friend, I brought my Bible. There ain't enough boxes to earn God's favor. They just aren't. So that's a place where we would fail from the very start. We can't earn our way back to God. What are we entitled to? Did I hear somebody say hell? Yeah. We're not entitled to anything. Everything that we have that's good, where'd it come from? God. Did we earn it? Not really. He's blessed us, right? Grace, not entitlement. And he's upset because he hadn't even had a young goat to celebrate with his friends with. Kill the fatted calf for this son of yours. But look at the father's response. I tell you, this is a good guy. My son, the father said, you are always with me, and everything I have is yours. Did the goat belong to him too? Yep. Yeah. He is sharing his life with this son who doesn't appreciate it and who has moved in his heart far away from God. But we had to celebrate and be glad because this brother of yours was dead and is alive again. He was lost and now is found. What types of people were listening to this story? Did y'all say tax collectors and sinners, Pharisees and teachers of the law? I told you that we've been that rebellious son. Have we also been the son that stayed home? Did what we were supposed to do, but then got upset because somebody else got something we wanted, or somebody else seemed to have God's favor, or somebody else was blessed and we weren't? Didn't feel that way anyway. Have we been the second son? Would that keep us from loving our brothers and sisters? It could. It shouldn't. It could. Kept this guy from loving his brother, didn't it? Yeah. Now, you would hope this brother would repent, fall on his knees and say, Dad, I am so sorry. My attitude was wrong. Pass me a plate. But I doubt that's what happened. And in real life, you remember the two groups again? Tax collectors and sinners, Pharisees and teachers of the law. Did the Pharisees and teachers of the law, the older brothers, ever come back home? No, some of them did. As you read carefully, you'll see that some of them do become Christian. Some of them do become Christ followers, but most did not. And so that's the end of the story, unfortunately. It's a story about you and me and human nature and the world that we live in and the way that different people respond to God and what he's done for us. But what do you think about God? He's pretty awesome. He looks for us a long way off, and he's ready to welcome us. He's ready to receive us. He's ready to bless us. And he says, son, daughter, everything I have is yours. Wow. Well, the next parable is a little weird. Jesus told his disciples there was a rich man whose manager was accused of wasting his possessions. So he called him in and asked him, what is this I hear about you? Give an account of your management because you cannot be manager any longer. What's happening to this guy? He's being fired. Here's your cardboard box. You can put your stuff in it. You have failed in your job. You have been my manager. You are no longer my manager. You have been wasteful. The manager said to him, what shall I do now? Said to himself, what shall I do now? My master is taking away my job, and I'm not strong enough to dig, and I'm ashamed to beg. So he doesn't see a good future for himself. Doesn't have a way to make a living. I know what I'll do, so that when I lose my job here, people will welcome me into their houses. So he called in each one of his master's debtors. He asked the first, how much do you owe my master? 900 gallons of olive oil. Is that a lot? Now, I don't know what the price of olive oil was back then, but I try to cook with it because it's supposed to be healthy, and get a little bitty bottle for a whole lot of money right there at the store. Have y'all noticed that? 900 gallons of olive oil. That'd be a lot, wouldn't it? It would. 900 gallons. So you reckon this guy works for somebody who's rich? Yeah. Yeah, he's very rich. The manager told him, take your bill, sit down quickly, and make it 450. Cuts it in half. Now, I need for some of my creditors to read this story. I just think this will be a good principle. A whole lot easier to pay some stuff off if they just cut it in half occasionally. Then he asked the second, how much do you owe? 1,000 bushels of wheat, he replied. That's a lot too, isn't it? He told him, take your bill and make it 800. All right, not quite as generous, but still good. The master, commended the dishonest manager because he acted shrewdly. What? Think about what he did. Why would the master be pleased with this? All right, he's losing money, so you would think he wouldn't be pleased with it. Sue says something's better than nothing, so maybe he's glad to have the income come in. All right. All right, so maybe he admires the shysterness of his manager. Could be. How do you think his customers, or in this case his debtors, feel about him now that his manager has cut their debt? They like him, right? He has earned goodwill among the people the master does business with. Who else does he earn goodwill with or for? So they like the master now. Who else do they like? They like this manager, this unemployed, soon to be unemployed manager. They like him too. Jesus goes on to say, for the people of this world are more shrewd in dealing with their own kind than are the people of light. I tell you, use worldly wealth to gain friends for yourselves, so that when it is gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings. Whoever can be trusted with very little can also be trusted with much, and whoever is dishonest with very little will be dishonest with much. So if you have not been trustworthy in handling worldly wealth, who will trust you with true riches? And if you have not been trustworthy as someone else's property, who will give you property of your own? No one can serve two masters. Either you will hate the one and love the other, or you will be devoted to the one and despise the other. You cannot serve both God and money. The Pharisees who loved money heard all this and were sneering at Jesus. Just a note to you, don't sneer at Jesus. He said to them, you are the ones who justify yourselves in the eyes of others, but God knows your hearts. What people value highly is detestable in God's sight. Is it wrong to have money? All right, I almost got a unanimous vote here in the Baptist church. That's a good thing. What's the money for? Well, We need food, we need shelter, we need, there are things that we need in life, and money helps provide those things. So, okay, Cheryl said we also need to give our blessings back to the Lord. So Jesus' parable is about money not being such a good thing, but it can be used in a really good way. The little bit of money we have can be used to make an eternal impact in the kingdom. So he says, use worldly wealth. Worldly wealth ain't going to amount to anything in heaven, but what will amount to something in heaven? The people that you bring in. And sometimes spending that worldly wealth to bring them in is important. And so he's saying, be shrewd, be smart. Use the resources that you have. And over and over in Scripture, some small thing like a slingshot could be used to kill a giant, or a staff might be the thing in Moses' hands that the Red Sea parts with, or a boy might have some, bread and fish and it feeds a multitude. Can God use a soccer ball? Yeah. Can he use a car? Yeah. Whatever you have, God can use it. And so Jesus' parable here reminds us that we need to use worldly wealth for good purposes. Some of you remember Calvin Willard. Calvin was very strong-willed and very conservative in his faith. And I remember years and years ago at a church conference, somebody just asked a question, and they said, "Preacher, if somebody won the lottery, would the church accept the money?" And I think I might have been a little bit new here. I don't know. But, before I could answer the question, Calvin Willard stood up, and he said, "I believe we should, because the devil's had that money long enough." Use worldly wealth, Jesus says, to gain friends for yourselves, so that when it is gone, you will be welcomed into eternal dwellings. Can you serve God and money at the same time? Jesus says one becomes a master. Can't serve two masters at the same time. And he goes on to say, if you're a good investment, if you're trustworthy with little, you'll be trusted with much. And if you're not trustworthy with little, you're not going to be trustworthy with much either. So, have you ever heard anybody say, if I only had $1 million, I'd do this, and I'd do this, and I'd do that, and I'd do that? Well, they might have good intentions, but the truth is, what you're going to do with the dollar that you do have.
That reminds me of the old saying, he who has much is required.
Yes. That's also a teaching of Jesus. To whom is given much, much is expected, much is required. Hey, thank y'all for hanging out with me tonight and looking at these passages. If it's all right with y'all, next week we might just keep going right here in Luke chapter 16. Let me dismiss us with a prayer. Father, thank you for these stories that were told long ago that still strike a place in our hearts. Help us that we might rejoice with those who return to you. Help us to return to you. Sometimes our hearts are far away from you, even if we hadn't left home. Draw us close to you and help us to use the resources you've blessed us with